So today I'm going to be replacing my caliper. Definitely they are going bad, but we're going to talk a little bit about the caliper, how it works, and how can you tell the difference between a bad caliper or just actual bad guide pins. So let's get to it. You have your caliper, you have your piston, and you have your brake fluid. Most cars, especially a smaller Toyota like this one, takes .3 fluid. The brake fluid is going to push on the piston, and that piston is going to push against the actual brake pad. Now, one of the brake pads is going to be a constant, which is going to be completely steady, and it's going to be held down by the caliper on the other side. And then the piston itself is going to push that brake pad and push it against the rotor, causing a sandwich effect, which closes on the rotor and sandwiches that all together. Now, inside, we do have the piston, we do have a dust shield and another seal to prevent the fluid from coming out of the actual piston itself. So if everything's working in order, your brake pads should have even wear across them. The first thing you'll notice with a bad caliper is going to be the inner pad itself is going to be completely wore out. It's going to wear out a lot faster from the inside than the outside. That is because when you push the piston, it's going to stick out and it's going to cause that brake pad to constantly be engaged, causing the inside pad to completely wear out. Now, there's two different things that can cause inner wear for the brake pad itself, and one is going to be a bad caliper, and then the other one's going to be the guide pins. Now, the guide pins is something that a lot of people really neglect, or they don't know exactly how to maintain. So the guide pins actually guide a piece of the caliper back and forth. If the guide pins are bent, broken, damaged, or seized onto the actual caliper itself, it will give you a misleading diagnosis of it actually being the caliper. But in reality, you have either bent, broken, damaged, or seized guide pins. Now, the guide pins themselves, you can replace them. If it is a guide pins and not your caliper, you can easily replace the guide pins. It's like replacing a screw or a bolt on some kind of component. And hopefully that's it. But if you can identify that it's your guide pins, I highly recommend you replacing the guide pins instead of replacing the entire caliper. So the last thing I'm going to be touching up on is going to be leaking. So your caliper itself is going to leak from the boot, especially if that sealed or that dust shield is completely wore out. The brake line can also be damaged. So if you have a broken brake line, then that could actually cause a leak. But you have to identify that it is a leak coming from the actual caliper itself. And if it is, I highly recommend that you get a new caliper. First thing you want to do is get any 14 millimeter. You're going to remove these two bolts that are attached to the guide pin, and it's two 14 millimeters. Any will do. You want to secure the top portion of the caliper. I like to secure it on the spring right there. It's attached to the shocks. So as you can see, it's a really nice area to put it. Next thing is the 18 millimeters. Notice that they're kind of tight. So when putting them back, don't forget to put on some Loctite. Next, we'll go ahead and remove the rotor. We'll go ahead and pull that and put it to the side. This is a newer rotor. I put it on there just to test it out to see if that caliper itself would compress. It didn't. There's a tear on the caliper and it's pretty stuck. In order for me to get a nice seat on there, I like to put the rotor back together and then start removing everything else that's attached to the caliper itself. The near one, you want to remove it. Usually it comes installed like that. It's a 14 mils on the side. You remove the top portion of it and you get ready to install the back portion of it. Now notice that those holes right there are going to mount up into the actual 18 mils inside, so got to remove all the hardware that comes along with the brake pads, and this is just going to be 1-to-1, so all the hardware is brand new. It's got maybe like a month or so, and so I'm just going to move it over to the new caliper. Once all the hardware is removed, we're going to go ahead and check and lubricate the guide pins. This is brand new, so it's just got shipping grease or packing grease, whatever the grease is that they have it, just so it can go, so it won't get rusty on the shelf. So now that the pads and the hardware and everything's all put back together, I got everything ready to install. So the last thing, again, I want to check these guide pins. Notice that that's a packing grease right there. So again, if these are not like well maintained and they don't have enough lubrication, it will give you a fault. Well, it'll simulate that your caliper is bad, but actually your guide pins are just either stuck or they can get seized into the inside of the uh, caliper itself. So make sure you lube them up. If you love it, you lube it. And the final thing is, once it's all lubed up, I put it all back together. Once we install it, we have the inner bracket, which is 218 mils. So the 218 mils, I like to install the bracket first, because once the bracket is on there, I'm able to actually put the other portion of the caliper. Notice the 218 mils right there is going to tighten up that bracket nice and tight. Everything's on there. I'm going to remove the line. This is a brake line with the 10 millimeters. Now the line itself has actual fluid in there, so I'm going to compress that with one of those pliers for the actual line itself to try to minimize the actual brake fluid that comes out of there. But once I remove that, I attach the entire caliper. Now this top portion of it, it is going to get replaced, but once you have it all on there, nice and snug, you'll be able to remove the line and then take that off and install the new one. Now, the crush washer itself for the older line looks like that. That's for the OEM little crush washer. The new caliper itself comes with 2 crush washers. They are brass. They look a lot better than the OEM crush washer. Usually I don't say that the OEM part does not look as better, or sometimes the OEM part is better, but in this case these crush washers actually look really good. We connected to the other portion of the caliper, so we're going to put that 10 millimeter on there, and then we're going to connect the line. Now notice the other one is still attached, so once that's done and then I tighten it up, I'm going to go ahead and tighten that up, and it's all attached. Now I got to remove the other portion of the caliper in a second. Once I got everything all tightened up, I'll go ahead and hang it up on the actual spring itself so I can tuck it away and put it out the way. Now I can go ahead and remove this portion. This is part of the older caliper. Now I have my brake pads, everything, it's all installed. So I got to remove it, and then just the line itself is guided just the way I wanted it. So I go ahead and put that all together, and then I'm going to install my 14 mils. So I'm going to hand tight the 14 mil on the top, and I'm going to hand tight the 14 mil on the bottom, and that's it. My caliper is completely installed, and there's nothing else that I need to do in order for me to have that. Now, in order for me to get a nice tight, snug fit on there, usually the guide pins are rusted or they're really stuck on there, so you don't need to hold it. But I use this other wrench, and then I use the socket on my ratchet to go ahead and finish it and tighten it up so everything's nice and snug, the guide pins and the nuts. And as far as the last thing, you want to bleed your brakes. I'm not going to go through the procedure of bleeding your brakes, but if you don't know how to do it, go ahead and do some research. I might do something just specifically as how I bleed my brakes, but this is how you would replace your caliper. This is my new caliper, and the last thing you want to do is bleed your brakes. It's really important that you bleed your brakes so you don't have air in the system, and that's it for today.